Today we have Tim on the podcast, and basically you're doing some research in harm reduction for anabolic steroid use, right? And so what did you reached out to me about as a participant in your current research? Tell us a bit about your research.
So my PhD was looking at obviously harm reduction in terms of performance enhancing drug use. Now it comes from a bit of a socio-cultural framework because I've got an exercise science and applied sciences background, but then moving into psychology, into that socio-cultural, why are men particularly inclined to change their appearance, and in what ways do they do that? The research that we've discussed a few times was looking at firstly how to bolster those harm reduction resources for men who are using performance and image enhancing drugs or anabolic androgenic steroids, and then more recently chatted about women and performance and image enhancing drug use, and whether that's a growing issue, whether it's a worry, whether we've got adequate strategies in place. So I think in terms of men, we don't have adequate strategies in place.
Okay.
And then in terms of women, well, how could we, if they're an even more marginalised group than men who are using? So
what's the issues we're trying to solve, or what are the problems you've seen that you're trying to resolve?
Well, we know that, and we've spoken about this, that prohibition's probably not working very well. And in terms of people using these compounds and things like that, it's going to happen, particularly in strength-based sports. Particularly, research has shown that we've got increases in recreational gym goers using these compounds, and it would be, it's always good to make sure that it's a safe environment. So I think there's a few levels of need here. There's the need for bloodborne virus and STI sort of safety, and that's done through needles, making sure that people know what needles to use, what tips to get for the oils, how to swab the site, etc., etc. So there needs to be education around that, and our needle service providers here in Brisbane and Gold Coast and Sunny Coast are pretty good around that. So I provide a few trainings there for a few organisations, but certainly in more rural areas, it's still we need to do a bit more work there. In terms of, once you've got that covered, then I suppose it's compound selection, isn't it? So making sure that nobody's going from 0 to 100 and deciding, trenbolone is the first place I'm going to go, and I'm going to do a gram a week, because I think that's obviously that's not a starting point, is it? Where do they get that information from? Is that information vetted in any way? Is it? It'd be nice to see. We've got forums, we've got good coaches and things like that. It'd be nice to see some more research or health-related research embedded into those practices. But obviously at that level, that's all taboo. So what do? Well, okay, what we can do is monitor maybe blood work, but people are still struggling to understand how to interpret that because it's so far out of the norm, isn't it? So in terms of coaching GPs or doctors in this area, we look at, or at least I look at, okay, if you don't want to prescribe, if you don't want to, take away that criminal element, that's fine. And they've got their own reasons for that around ethics and other things. But in terms of monitoring the patient, I think at least in our state, there's a lot more openness coming through now. So they're willing to look at those bloods. They're willing to check, liver function, general health, have a chat with the guy,
So what level are we trying to implement these strategies at? Are we taking it from, are you taking it to try and, like you said, the peer-to-peer kind of approach, or are we going to go through, are you aiming to go through like from the levels of the medical industry filtering down? I mean, what kind of, at what level are we trying to implement some of these harm reduction strategies?
I think, if you can imagine like octopus tentacles coming out, Then I run a few trainings for general practitioners, getting this stuff across. Then by doing so, anybody comes to talk to me about anything, I can say, I've got somewhere that you can go that's safe, that doesn't have the stigma, and they're open to this, to at least monitoring you. Okay. And then at the needle service providers, there's that training there. This is how to engage with this group. And then sometimes they don't want to engage. Sometimes they just want to go in, grab their needles, go. So give them the right stuff and leave them alone.
Yeah.
Because that's what works, and we want to do what works. And then at the next level, I think Victoria, for example, has a great peer support program where they've got a steroid peer education support worker. Now, she directly deals with that population group, whether it's just dropping off some supplies, but also checking in on them, seeing how they're going,
right,
seeing what they need, what's going on, monitoring trends in terms of what's going on at a black market level, what compounds are.
So what are their motivation behind this? Is this like, because I mean, this industry is full of people who take different approaches to doing it in the way they help or educate or coach it, whether it's in a way of, to produce extreme levels of performance and physique changes, or whether it is harm reduction. I mean, so what are these peers doing that are helping them? Is it a motivation to get them to not use, like how you would with, I guess, other illicit drugs, or is it more teaching and educating them on how to use it and what they need to be looking out for?
I think twofold. If people want to stop using, they'll stop using, but whatever the reasons, right? And we spoke about this, I think, a bit ago. Whatever the reasons, those reasons are theirs to resolve, not ours, right? You provide them with a safe environment. You provide them with trusting environment. You provide them with somewhere where they can start to feel comfortable and open about whatever. And then these issues normally resolve themselves. And then down the track, other addiction-related issues get resolved. Performance is a little bit different, so we'll talk about that in a sec. But I think at that level, providing that safe support network is super important. And then from there, after that goes on for a while. From there, maybe down the track, you can start to ask questions like, hey, have you considered cutting down your use? Have you considered your motivations around use? Have you considered what makes you want to do this or feel the need to do this? But that's a discussion for, I'm talking 12 months minimum, That's the time you see a patient like that maybe once a month or more. Maybe at the needle exchanges, they're getting 100 barrels at a time. So you're not seeing them for a little bit if they're blasting, or cruising even longer. So you've got very short little opportunities to make a good impression. And that's all about safety and trust. Or at least my research has shown that, particularly between interviewing both consumers and service providers, social workers, GPs, needle service providers, and the consumers. It's all about that rapport, that trust, and then maybe you ask that question like, hey, so what do you reckon?
What are your thoughts on that? Obviously the population of people who usually are taking anabolic steroids, especially in the athletic field, are going to be people of slightly higher, I don't know, how would you put it? I guess less of a drug of dependency, people who are a bit more educated about the choices that they are making, and that some of them are already weighing up the risk-benefit ratios without too much care on their own health to a degree. I mean, and I know some of these people would could do with more intervention, but doesn't change what they were going to do. So their motivation towards the use of drugs in comparison to maybe some of your harder drugs, even though they're classed in the same category.
It's 2014, yeah.
Should it be treated in the same way, or does it need to be taken a different approach? Because I think maybe it stems maybe from how the drugs are being classed, and that it's treated as something that shouldn't be taken, and maybe it shouldn't, but it will and will always. But in comparatively, also the not saying it's not harmful, but is definitely less harmful and can be done very smart in a way that can help people perform, or even just from a hormone replacement therapy standpoint, providing longevity and better. I've seen people pretty happy, much happier on with their lives, both mentally and physically, being on hormone replacement therapy. So with that into consideration, the population type, is there a different, is there, do you think there should be a different approach, or is there a different strategy to that, or is it still the same?
I think public health wise, it's a lot easier to say these are all grouped together. So we tackle them with the same budget or the same funding or the same group of research. From a real social well-being perspective, I see that there's slight differences between, say, AAS or PEDS and other drugs of addiction, right? We do have some research to say there's hedonic effects, so there's that reward pathway that does get stimulated from, say, testosterone or testosterone derivative, but that's slightly different. And, these are still mainly animal studies that are going on. I do have a PhD student coming up to look at this stuff. So that'll be real interesting. We'll see what starts to happen. I'd really like to look at those dopamine reward pathways. But this term dependence, there's a group of researchers in America that started to look at, back in 2011 and 12, out of, I think, Belmont it was, started to look at this dependence and treatment options. Now, I think with anything, you've got prevention, intervention, treatment. But everybody forgets, or not everybody, but it's forgotten about just management, like management and harm reduction. In terms of performance, I think it's completely different now. So we're talking about optimizing what's going on in terms of, say, something like powerlifting, strongman. And this is a tool for that job. And I noticed that there's almost a protective element around performance-related goals. As soon as goals become image-centric, that's when the use changes and the trajectory, I've noticed, changes. At least in another group of interviews I did a while back, it was a big difference between bodybuilding sort of related or image related enhancement strategies versus performance related enhancement strategies. Certainly the literature will tell you there's links between sport and steroid use or things like that. But there's a difference between somebody using for 12 weeks and then stopping for 12 weeks, or stopping for a few years and then having a double again. I think that anybody's going to dip their toe in a pond. If it's going to be long live, how safely can it be long live? If it's not, maybe just do it carefully, have a go, and then once you're done, stop having a go. But don't make any don't have severely life-changing impacts from having a go. And that's where, somebody injects wrong, hits a vein or something, they'll be a little bit uncomfortable. But if they share a needle with somebody, then that's completely different, isn't it? If they run 10 weeks of orals. Sorry, Ben.
No. It's interesting. A couple of things are interesting in what you're saying. One, you're likening it, you keep saying addiction, right? So that there's obviously a psychological factor there. The other thing is, I know nothing about steroids, okay? Where would someone even go to get good information if they say they did want to start? Where could they even go to get this information? It's funny that you speaking now here is the first time I've actually been made aware of the fact that obviously there's needle use involved. So the same risks are present with other kind of needle use. Like obviously it's an obvious risk factor for, say, a heroin addict that you don't share needles and all that kind of stuff. I've never actually heard it discussed about steroid use before, and it's stuff like that. Like Where's somebody supposed to go for this information? Is it anywhere or?
It's so, and great point. At needle service providers, at the needle exchanges, they've got pamphlets here and there that they hand out, short pamphlets about how to inject and things like that. They've also, in conjunction with Andrew Preston and colleagues from I think they're from the UK, they've got a booklet there. Queensland Injectors Health Network, who I tie in with quite closely and do a bit of work with, they've got a steroid book as well, and likely I'm putting together a few resources here and there as well that I think will fit. But in terms of getting that, I think an online platform. So Quinn released a high ground. It's called highground.org.
Okay.
And I've written, there's a section on that page that I've written up about safe sort of harm reduction approach to use, which then I've gotten, a fair few people to have a look at. And I said, hey, does this fit? What can I change? Pardon me. What can I change? What can I do better? And then consequently keep updating, keep upgrading. Be real nice to have like a secret members group or like a password protected, like advanced sort of group where there's, bits and pieces written. But I think down the track, there'll be sort of like live discussions facilitated or workshop discussions.
I think the challenging thing is that you're putting yourself in the sea of many other people that are doing the same thing, but for different motives and different perspectives. So it's like there are secret membership groups. There are forums where you can join and talk about use, and people might go into that thinking that is this a better way to do it, a safer way to do it, or are they doing it for performance? I mean, there might be other coaches who are uneducated who are trying to do a harm reduction approach but are still doing it wrong. It's just, how do you make yours the recognized standard to people go and see, when in this industry it's huge, and it just seems to be getting bigger, especially in the online presence of it, people being steroid coaches or call themselves drug coaches. And how do we work around that problem?
Well, what I was going to add is I think there's some great coaches here in Queensland, and I think that they can provide you not only with the training and diet and things like that, but also they have that knowledge. But there's a barrier there, isn't there, around criminality, around and it's sort of been linked in with health when it's not necessarily health. Criminal things and legal things are those things, and health related things are over here. We really need to try and tease those apart. But I think the issue here is that, how do you centralize it? I mean, there's the big difference between commercial gain and public safety and well-being, and I always try and approach things from that angle. So obviously, research and like academia, that's the work, and this sort of fits in under that, but from a different perspective. And I think if we take the harm reduction, social well-being approach, then that's the way to do it. But it would suck to have a network of peer workers here in Queensland and not be paying them. I think that's a government-funded initiative, and there should be some compensation for time. I think that's reasonable. Not for me. I mean, for the people that might fit into that network. And I think it starts at a state level, or maybe even a city level, and then it builds to a national level. And then if it goes further, it goes further. But that's the sort of progression, I think.
I think you're definitely right there in terms of payment. I think most people who are going to be quite educated in this area are going to be people who are surrounded, time for money. And it is a lot of time. It is a lot of work you got to spend, because it's a very one-on-one approach. Depending on how in depth you want to go with someone, it's a lot of time commitment. For one person to put in.
But if a few of those lead coaches in Queensland sort of took that peer support approach, right, and they just contributed an hour or two a month, you could split it if you had enough for a live facilitated discussion online. Or there's ways that it can be done as a public health initiative maybe, and then through that, maybe that will attract funding that allows for more time dedicated to those things. Because I think at the minute it's a little bit ignored. You look at, like Ben said, heroin or methamphetamine use. Now there's peer support networks in place for those.
Yeah.
They even get little certificates and things for their training. But PED users are constantly left on the sidelines, or PED consumers, sorry, and it's not that anyone's better or worse or junkie or not junkie. Like, that's not what this is about. It's about providing a harm reduction approach that fits the right places. And even with what you said earlier about the needle sharing and stuff, well, no, there's not that much needle sharing unless you look at jail settings. But maybe vial sharing. You know, if you share a vial with somebody else, there's still little risks and things. So again, it's got to be like specific for the group. And again, you know, are bloodborne viruses a problem? Well, research tells us that it's not super big. Like, steroid users are pretty good with this sort of stuff.
Okay.
So, I remember when you first opened up this topic, you're talking about this having the differences between male and female interventions. So, are there differences in approach to this support group when it comes to utilizing it for men and women?
It'd be nice to have, I guess, a woman who's or a female that's a support worker as well in that context. I think it's, you know, relatability is a big thing. You, as a woman, you probably wouldn't want a guy sitting there, and to some level, but I think there's just that little bit of extra relatability if it was another female saying, "Hey, I've done this," or this is what I know, and this is what I've done, and this is how I'm blending it together to help you make some choices, or give you the information to make the right choices. I think that'd fit real nice.
So does that also relate to the fact that are the repercussions for women in terms of health issues, do they differ from men drastically? And I mean, I don't know if you know this, are the motivations different as well? Because obviously, if that is the case, if you're getting different repercussions and different motivations, that would be no different from, like they're not relatable at all because they can't relate to what they're going through.
I think with the long-term health, like you're thinking about internal organ health, brain health, like there's some parallels, and then you're thinking about menstrual cycles, you're thinking about child bearing. But I think Gus can elucidate more around the motivation sort of side of things, or I think you put it quite well.
Yeah. So there is a difference in terms of the side effects that come from the use of anabolic steroids with women in comparison to men, and the major difference is that in most cases, and for more of the symptoms, is that the problems are usually permanent compared to men. I mean, there are some changes that men experience as well, but they're usually less problematic, like a bit more hair growth, you know, or something like that. And where someone's, you know, changes in menstrual cycle, the capacity to bear a child, or changes in their voice, or growths in various areas of the body that can't be then, you know, changed. And then in terms of motivation, we come back to the initial question, is that, you know, what is the motivations driving the issues? And how I found is that, especially if someone has, you said, if it's feeding into a massive physique change, or looking at image change, from when people talk about it to me, I'm normally screening their motivation. And if it is driven through body image, it's more of a mechanism that feeds into that same problem most of the time, where the motivation behind performance still being a selfish reasoning, but it doesn't seem to be as problematic but still has, you still have those addictive properties that in terms of the behaviors and choices they still make, but they seem to not still be centered around what is going to be optimized for performance, rather than the body image is more about, I've seen a lot, take more and take more and take more, because it keeps feeding into the same image problem. So as a coach, when people do bring it up, it is, what is the motivation behind that choice? What has led them to those decisions? And can I educate them into making, or educating them into showing them, are there solutions to the problem we're trying to solve through normal training, nutrition, health means? And most cases, yes. There's only, if someone comes to me who is at the absolute top of their level and want to make it to a higher level, and they've put in many years of work, then yes, it's going to be a massive advantage, and it is what's going to take them to that. Is going to take them to that level if they've done everything they can. However, there's always room on the table without the use, and the question to use it or not is usually most of the case you don't. I remember quite a few years ago, in powerlifting, about a decade ago really, is that nutrition wasn't really seen as a big thing in powerlifting, and I was the first person from a bodybuilding background just started to come across into powerlifting. People hadn't made that transition yet, so I had known people, so I had a fair bit of knowledge on nutrition. And at the time, a lot of my clients, especially female clients, were getting really crazy strong. None of them were using at the time, and it just kind of been one example to show that, something small, like, well, nutrition isn't small, but, changes in methodology about how we can approach, some of the changes that these people want, and educating people in that can show that you can still make very elite level and advanced progression without the use. And then if you do come into use, it's then also, if their motivation is to take a lot to make it far, it's also giving the education to understand that a lot does not need to be taken. More often not, especially with women, I've seen that less is more. And I've seen comparisons and witnessed it with many other women, where I usually know what a lot of other people are taking. Just gossip spreads when you're close, when you're in depth in the community, and so you hear things, and and I've had obviously a lot of athletes at a high level come to me knowing what they've taken as well. But I've seen people experience far superior growth, or even similar growth and changes in performance, with very minimal dosing, which means that the harm on that individual is a lot less. And usually what is less harmful, especially with women, is usually going to still produce far more results than taking more. It just becomes a point of diminishing returns. And I am forever, and I do have to take a slow approach with some people in terms of trying to, like how you were saying that you might take 12 months. And it's kind of the same for me. I do have to take time and say, like, can we reduce this? And once I've usually built the trust of some of these athletes, then it's like, alrighty, here's, like, start to present information, trial something different through other means, and comparatively, where I have seen high doses and then we've done other performance with low doses, we usually perform better, because in general, what's going to reduce harm is going to preserve, health. And what preserves that allows you to recover, perform, and do what you need to do to get what you need out of training and nutrition. Does that sound like kind of...
Well, more consistency, longer time, you're not taking a heap and then suddenly getting frustrated when you're off and quitting or anything like that, There's always... That helps, doesn't it? Consistent training, nutrition, recovery.
And that's looking at that motivation again, isn't it? Where it's saying, like, if people are having that motive to take that shortcut, it's then showing them and teaching them how that here is a better way. But at the same time, I never take it off the table for them, because if I take it off the table, then do I close them off to ever them telling me or expressing that to me?
This is where
it happens.
You're making a psychological intervention there, and this is a theme in every podcast we have, but most of your work is almost therapy, because the way you describe how you tackle that is very similar to the way you describe how you tackle diet with people who chronically undereat, or like it's the same kind of dynamic. How much of a, just for somebody who has no idea, how much of a cheat code is it? Like I think that for somebody like me, that's how it's viewed, right? Like if I juice in a week, I'm gonna like double my numbers. Or I guess aesthetics wise, it's more difficult because
not really.
You will never be where you need to get to aesthetics wise. It's just bigger, more, or whatever. But
the common variable to not people being successful is their own life choices, their own training, their own nutrition, their own habits. Like, yes, you take steroids, you'll make initial growths and changes to your body, but it's quite short-lived if you're not doing the right things with your training anyway. Performance enhancement drugs is meant to enhance exactly what you're trying to do.
Right.
It will give you an initial enhancement, but I've seen it a lot where if there's a reliance on just utilizing and I've seen it where people just utilize steroids to make their changes. They're gonna get stuck in the cycle of wanting to keep taking more, and it does make more progress, but they're not doing anything about their training nutrition. This is where I look at the interventions behind what are some of the other solutions to the problem they're trying to solve. And that's just the common coach question I'm asking anyway. What problems am I trying to solve? And trying to give them solutions, training, nutrition, lifestyle solutions to those problems. And steroids is 99.9% of the time not going to be the case. And so when I've had individuals with that kind of idea that take a shortcut, they take it, then they take some more, and then they take more, and then they take some more, and then they want to cut, so they take clenbuterol and tren, and then they want to get bigger, and they'll take some other compounds, and their body will make changes to the degree that stimulus no longer works, and they will continue to run through these cycles. They'll come off and they completely lose all their progress because that was their only form of stimulus. And so then when someone who's quite smart understands that they've utilized the maximal capacity of, or close to the maximal capacity of their physiology, then it does act as enhancement. And because they know how to train, they usually sustain most of their progress. There's usually a reduction in performance of about say 20 or 30%, but they usually they usually bridge that gap pretty quickly if they know what they're doing. So it does create an enhancement, and it will create permanent enhancement if you're smart at what you're doing.
Yeah, so it's a force multiplier, but
it will, to make progression will always take longer naturally.
Yeah.
At that level, for a novice, it barely makes a difference. As you see novices, the progress you're going to make just from training nutrition alone is going to be more advanced than no matter how much steroids I ever take. I can take. It doesn't matter how much I take. I'll never will make the gains as a noob would in their first 2 or 3 years. Yeah. So they shouldn't really be they should not take it anyway.
Yeah.
So that's why that motive matters, because then we're here to then educate them into showing them. So then this is also then stem further than just utilizing how to manage harm reduce with just uses of steroids, but then showing people and educating people in areas that if this is your motive and the problem you're trying to solve, then here are better solutions.
Like if you want to look better, then here's the other pieces of the puzzle,
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah, but is it as quick? Is that going to do what 2 mils of tren and 2 mils of test a week can do for me?
If you're smart enough,
Yeah.
yes. If you're smart enough, it can. And it just says it just depends on what level you're looking at. If you're good at your job, if you're good at your job, you can make progress as fast as someone who doesn't know what they're doing taking steroids. And I think people create motivation through what other people are doing right, and trying to find shortcuts to that. Where you see it all the time now. It didn't happen so much when I first started because it wasn't as a bigger community, and we're all the initial people who were getting strong. We're all getting strong together, So there wasn't really many people who were stronger than us when we were first starting. But by means of the standard today, we weren't that strong, And now with today's standards, all those initial people that we initially trained with are the really strong people, and people will look up to that and want to get there by taking a shortcut, which then causes problems because the same thing, the motive behind it, which then the solution there to getting that strong is many decades of training in diet and consistency, where no steroid's going to bridge that gap. But this is how I kind of educate my clients and athletes who come to me with that question, whether they want to start taking it or not. I even bring the topic up, just in case they have been thinking about it and they might not want to tell me. And that's happened too. They're taking it without me knowing, and they're not doing it quite right. So I'll always preemptive it to then at least, because if they're getting more competitive, it's like, okay, there's something driving these people, so I got to bring the topic up and clearly around. And some people are like, nah, I never want to take it. It's like, cool, that's great. Tell me if you do. And that's about it.
So on the back to the public health side then. Sorry, what does this actually look like as a public health issue? Because obviously, maybe ending prohibition's a bit too much. It'll happen at some point. But what are we dealing with on a population-based level that would cause the government to actually go, we need to fix this problem? Is it enough of a problem?
I think so. The data that we've got from, say, Australian Health and Welfare, we've got 0.3% of our population agree. Oh, sorry. The most recent one, I think it was 0.6 or 0.7. So, nearing, what's that? At least 800,000, 700,000, something like that.
Which isn't insignificant.
Sorry, no, it's not, because we don't have 100 million. Look, it's actually, sorry, it's a lot less. But still, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah. So I think that's an underrepresentation. I think you combine that with two things. We've got seizure data from the federal police here that's saying that the weight of steroid seizures is increasing and the quantities are increasing year to year to year. I think we've also got data from the needle service providers that's saying that about 50% of new injectors, their first drug that they're injecting is performance enhancing drugs or steroids. So we've got high percentages. Those rates of people going into needle exchanges to get needles, of those people, it went from 2% to 7% between 2008 and 2012. And then it's gone up again to, I think, 12% or so, maybe about 12% in 2017, 18. Don't have anything newer than that, but I'm sure it's still progressively going up. So people, that shows me that it's increasing. The proliferation of strength-based sports shows it's probably increasing. And the fact that there's more access to the compounds is showing increases. Recently, Matt Dunn and I from Melbourne, we looked at the impact of COVID on ped consumption and things like that. Okay. Now, because there was a few things that we looked at, but I think one of the more interesting findings was that the impact of COVID didn't necessarily reduce access. And that's because of these online markets and these dark web vendors.
Right.
And because of that, the way I interpreted, or the way that we interpreted that, was that this is actually great harm reduction, right? People don't have to stop based on lack of compounds or choices or anything like that. They stop or they can drop their use because they still have access to what they need, and they can just either change accordingly. Oh, competitions are out, can't get to the gym, whatever. I will drop down to a cruise, or I will think about stopping because I've got access to the PCT that I would need, or I've got access to the compounds. And I think that's great.
Yeah.
On one level, obviously on a legality level, that's a completely different discussion. But from a harm reduction standpoint, that access to compounds is great, I think, because it makes people, as soon as people get worried or think that, oh, it's not there, or I don't have this, the choice is driven by fear or by worry or by things like that. It's not, a calm sort of choice that it should be. Oh, can't get to the gym. It's probably no point of taking so many things, but it's okay. It's there. I can get it when I need it. And therefore, I think on the flip side, that's, all that discussion is limited by legal things, legal issues and things like that. But PCT access and access to compounds to, reduce blood pressure or, I guess, save other elements of your health, that's on the table for doctors to prescribe, for GPs to prescribe, what I mean? That's still a public health initiative that we could look at. Willingness to prescribe these compounds for either to encourage break-taking behaviours, because we're seeing that people aren't taking breaks. Their last cruise is like the norm now. That COVID data showed us almost everybody out of the sample all over Australia that's the choice. Last cruise. High dose, low dose, high dose, low dose. And, if we, maybe we can harm reduce that, but if we could say, hey, this, you can get some HCG pretty easy now. You can get Clomid, Nolva pretty easy now. You can get whatever other stuff you need. Get your bloods monitored. Maybe people would be more open to having a break. And openness to having a break might lead to, openness to reducing dose. And then other things start to open up.
And then that becomes more expensive too. That becomes more expensive too if people are, trying to underground source these post-course therapy solutions, and they can be very expensive. And if you do it through if you treat it as a medical health problem,
PBS.
Then,
Yeah.
But we discussed this before, saying a little bit, and I guess to get your interpretation of it too, is that the criminalization of the drug use also creates different questions and different solutions. How do you think the legalization, or keeping it illegal, how does that change the scenario for you, or does it help what you're trying to do?
Oh, look, the legality side is, I think, outside of the scope in some ways. I mean, I think the best example, so I'm looking at running a self-compassion, we're doing a self-compassion intervention, Griffith Uni and I, some researchers there, looking at people on parole and transitioning out of prison. I think self-compassion, that framework, is the same framework that can be applied here, rather than a legal framework or a criminal framework. So I'm working with the Criminality Institute. We're looking at things like common humanity, mindfulness, things like that, and how that's going to... everybody makes a mistake, or everybody makes choices that perhaps later down the track they might have thought that they would want to reconsider, right? Now, with that framework in mind, the criminality or the legality of these substances should start to drop off from people's minds, right? Because this is a choice that they're making at one point in their life. They might not make this choice forever, they might. It doesn't matter, but if you approach it from a compassionate framework, then perhaps we can start to just think about the health and ignore these legal consequences. Because really, some guy getting pinged with a couple vials in his bag and suddenly he's got to go to court, is that criminal, or is that just unlucky if there's hundreds of other ones doing it? What's that protecting? Is that meant to be protecting him? Because certainly my research would show, and has told the story, that as soon as that happens, the trajectory for that person rapidly shifts and they start to get involved with other groups or other people, or start to do more crime and more intense levels of antisocial behaviour, or whatever you want to call it, at least from the qualitative research I've done, interviews, focus groups, things like that. So I think I know I'm going in a big circle, but I think in blending those approaches together, really that legal aspect should at least somewhat be informed by a social well-being, public health perspective. That really, okay, maybe it's illegal. Okay, cool. Well, maybe the scheduling shouldn't be so harsh, considering it's not changing border seizures in terms of Queensland. Queensland has the harshest penalties out of any other state, and we're still more weights coming in, more vials are coming in. It's not stopping anything. So perhaps thinking about, well, what other strategies might stop this behaviour? Maybe more prevention initiatives at school, maybe more pathways, rather than, from court sending these people to a recognizance program that's fitted for heroin or methamphetamine. Maybe we should have a specialised program that captures these and moves them away from those choices. Certainly, I mean, a lot of guys have sort of said it'd be great if doctors would just prescribe it. And through my discussions with that side, they've got their own sort of reasons and ethical and moral obligations around that. And certainly down the track, if somebody's deficient or something like that, that's a different story. But I mean, there needs to be, instead of a punitive sort of solution, maybe some sort of support or compassionate solutions, safe environments, things like that might be a little bit nicer, might actually start to flesh out that motivation. And the motivation for use might have been bullying, or might have been actual other people's antisocial behaviours on that person, and they've made a choice. And that choice isn't necessarily permanent, but certainly the repercussions on a legal level can be permanent for that person. And that's really unfortunate, I think. So back to your question, what do we do? I think, keep pushing social well-being and public health, and put things in place. If this isn't going to change, that's fine. We'll just put structures and mechanisms in place to support those people, support that safety, and then support them through making, choices related to other things. I don't know, focusing on, training without that stuff for a while, or focusing on music or art, or, whatever. It's just something for a little bit even.
How do they make these places safe for people, and not a place where, where government intervention for gaining information on activities, because that'll be maybe the concern for some people, I guess. It's like if they're going to be open about it to people, that in an organization that is going to be monitored or regulated with, then how do you make that feel safe, and how do you prevent these people from, being, I guess, investigated?
I suppose you're making sure that it's exclusively, so I think I like the research setting, exclusively in an academic research sort of setting, it fits. Exclusively in a health setting, it fits. I suppose as soon as you bring in government or criminality elements, or government employees, that might shift, and certainly wouldn't want to exclude them. but you got to make sure that they're willing to sit within your framework rather than a punitive, black and white, sort of right and wrong thing. But really, you're right. That's probably going to scare a few. It certainly with other drugs of addiction. People are worried about phone conversations or things like that. I think there's some crossover there, and the ethical framework that, say, universities can have by leading these sorts of things is what's going to stop, that sort of monitoring that you might want. I think that's the way forward. Public health, university, health setting, and that's where that should sit.
And so that shows that shows, it's almost like that shows your case to why this should be protected, kind of sanctioned or something for them to discuss. Is that what you're trying to? Is that what you mean? That the research setting allows it to be more officialized setting to then establish these programs?
Yeah, I think at least in like a piloting or trialing sense, it's sort of, what we're doing now isn't working, so let's see if this framework works, and just give us a little bit of time and let's see if it works. And I think under that sort of, we'll see what happens. Certainly, I don't think, that the punitive sort of issues aren't going to stop, but at least if that's going to keep happening, if we can provide adequate support around that, that'd be great. But can't do anything about, police or government surveillance or things like that. That might or mightn't happen. I suppose there'll be some level of ethical obligation, or perhaps some sort of data protection policies, right? That's normally what fits within university research. But also, I think looking from the outside in, those types of organisations might be able to respect what we're trying to do in the sector, and might, just give it a break for a little while and see if this works and has good positive outcomes, and then we can start to try and cross collaborate and things like that. It's one thing, surveillance for crime, and then for this.
Yeah. And just makes it unfortunate, because I know some of the reasons they implemented these strategies for the harsher categories was to get bigger punishments for people who are dealing, which is the drug smuggling, and then the heavy distribution, and then the little guys, suffer, who are just trying to do what they want to, for their own selfish reasons. But then, like you said, they're immediately classed as a criminal, and it's a bit harsh.
But it is a victimless crime if you're doing it to yourself, I guess.
It's your own body.
You're the victim then, aren't you?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So, it's interesting. Do you think anybody thinking about using PEDs really is scared of the criminality aspect of it?
Well, they don't know. Often research tells us that they're not necessarily aware that, at least in Queensland, it's zero. Up to 25 years in prison.
See, right,
you're not going to get a 25-year sentence for a vial or something, but
But I had no idea. That's the first time I've heard. I knew they were illegal, but are they heroin illegal, or are they marijuana illegal? Or I didn't even realize there were any actual legal repercussions. I presume there would be seizures.
Same level as heroin or methamphetamine.
That's insane.
For Queensland.
That's crazy.
Is it just Queensland?
Yeah, Victoria and New South Wales. I think they're shifting, but at least in the last decade they had a different scheduling. I think it was a Schedule 4 or something like that. We shifted in 2014, 13, in line with those VLAD laws and everything. They decided to also shift the steroids. Certainly, Wendell Rosevier from Stonewall Medical Center, who I'm a big fan of, and he's come to some of my trainings and we've worked together on a few things. But he says that he's trying to change that scheduling. And there's a few other people on board, but he's working at that policy change level to try and said that it was due to not due to evidence, and there's other political motives for doing that. So I think down the track, like, we might get some change around it, but at a policy level, you really need to provide enough evidence to say that this is a public health concern and not a legal concern. I guess at another level, here's the thing, if you start using performance enhancing drugs or steroids or whatever, then suddenly maybe you don't see like the aggression increase or the other things increase. So it might lead to different choices and different trajectories, and therefore that's the public health perspective on the flip side that people are concerned about, right? So there's this idea of violence or things like that. Now, again, just had a paper published looking at exploring that relationship between steroids and violence. And at least from my data, it looks like the guys that are using, none of them actually performed any antisocial or violent behaviours just from steroids. It was always in conjunction with alcohol and other drugs or peers. So those were the two other things that required them to, and they all engaged in like some level of violence, like a fight or something like that in a public place, leading to arrest or hospitalization or something like that. But it was never, it's not like they were walking around on the street and just because they were on, did they decide to get into a fight. It was fueled in other settings. I think that's an important part of it. And again, Matt Dunn from Deakin and I were looking at a systematic review, teasing apart the last 50 years of evidence, looking at violence and anabolic androgenic steroid use and whether there's a link there. So there's a difference between aggression and antisocial sort of personality traits and actual outcomes. So maybe guys can use these sorts of things and, maybe they can be cranky or whatever. But I think at a public health level, it's only really a worry if they're hurting other people, whether that's verbal or physical. But if they're not, they can just be as angry as you want. Like,
it's not illegal to be angry.
Like, be cranky, that's fine. Just don't take it out on anyone else. So if there's enough evidence to say that, then perhaps, maybe the scheduling, that maybe that's a way where we can start to look at other change. I think that's, we're talking about harm reduction and this and that. There's the public health perspective for everybody else. Like, we don't want a bunch of, giant guys walking around that are angry, that are going to hurt people or intimidate or anything like that.
The classic, like, roid rage. I mean, but that is the common viewpoint. Like someone on steroids is imbalanced, right? That is one viewpoint of people taking PEDs, is that they are unhinged in some way because of that use.
I think and research will tell us, at least, there's higher rates of mood disorders or personality-related disorders, but those directions can sometimes, that can be pre-existing and therefore amplified by this, or it can be as a component of the use. The issue that stigma causes is that people then don't reach out for help, or they're just labelled as junkie or roid rage or whatever, and then suddenly they're ostracized, and then suddenly all of this stuff's amplified tenfold and there's no support, and then it just gets worse. And then we hear about the incidences where somebody's having real mental health problems.
There's definitely, it does have an effect on people's mental health if, same thing, not educated or supported in the right way. Especially I found the most when people come off, or when let's say, for example, they've been using for some time and they get duds because it is an underground market where it's not the purity of it is things. And as a coach, I should get people to test their vials, because you can get little lab kits now that can actually test the quality of it, and then also in conjunction with blood tests, you can you can test the quantity or its effectiveness.
So guys, just on that, see, there's an important thing that should be given to GPs. They wouldn't necessarily, be saying, go and test it. We can't test it for you, but go and test it. Or send a mill away to this lab. That's part of the public health tie-in. And I think that's good. That's important. Comparing to blood work, doing the testing. That's the type of thing.
I mean, that's what they do. Sorry, like continue.
I think if people are looking at it, it's called Roid Test or Roid Kit.
Right.
You can buy it online. They're in Australia now, so I think it was UK based or Canadian based, one of them, and then now it's available in Australia. So that is for anyone. And now, in terms of the mental health aspect, when their testosterone levels do have vast fluctuations, including the suppression of testosterone after use. So when you're using it, your natural production is reduced, and that can have a mental health effect in terms of creating, especially in men, high levels of anxiety and depression. When those levels get too low, similar symptoms to someone who already would have naturally low testosterone, they have usually a high tendency to experience anxiety and depression a little bit more. And for someone who might be used to having high testosterone, feeling good, and that good feeling that they get from the testosterone, I can't remember the exact science and the neurochemistry behind it, but there are changes in that, which then fast drop in use can create this from how I've been explained, is like you get a higher output of, you get the policing the dopamine reward systems and a few other neurotransmitters, and then when you drop the use, there becomes this massive difference where we're not stimulating that same responses, and then for these individuals that can create mental health problems where we have differences in the way we feel. And so, with the mental health aspect, if we're not utilizing proper post-course therapy and not understanding how that is, or understanding or testing the vials we use and getting blood tests, then we can ensure to protect ourselves from those massive fluctuations that you might experience. And in terms of the rage, from my own personal experience I've seen with clients and athletes, is that it doesn't cause rage, but there are various compounds I've seen to elicit more aggressive responses.
Well, you want those for competition sometimes, though.
And a lot of people do take those. So it's like usually Trembolone is the kind of one here, when and it is very dependent on each individuals that, if they want to take Trembolone, which has strong property, has a lot of side effects, but a lot of properties for physique enhancement and performance. People must tread carefully, because some people have more aggressive tendencies from the use of that, from what I've observed with people, and some people don't. It is really just dependent on that individual. And what's the other ones, like halo testing? People use that as a form of actually purposely getting more aggressive for competition. But it doesn't necessarily mean that these people will engage in antisocial behaviors. They just might be more aggressive. I usually hear it from their partners a lot of the times, but not in a bad way. They're just more aggressive, in different aspects of their life. But it doesn't create this, roid rage where people are spontaneously getting mad and hurting
smashing
people,
the house up and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Your thoughts on that?
I think that's a media thing. it's not even legal
Yeah.
or a public health thing. That's a media thing. You know, people use drugs and go crazy, or some stuff like that, and suddenly that's the impression everybody has, and then you've got to do all this reparatory work to try and fix that. Certainly, like, you know, if people start using extreme trend doses for like a long period, they're probably not going to feel very good. It's probably going to be some stuff upstairs to address. I'm talking, you know, a lot for a long time, leading to like suicidal ideations and things like that. But other drugs will do that to you as well.
Of course.
You use even something like cannabis, you've got a risk of a psychotic episode. I think 11% of first users have that risk, and that's people are willing to take that risk.
Yeah.
Suddenly, you know, with this, as long as it's, you know, purposed appropriately for the competition, as long as that aggression isn't translated into verbal or physical abuse anywhere, then I guess somebody could argue that perhaps from a public health, again, from like a social, cultural perspective or something, it's intimidation if people are walking around and looking quite big and whatever. But I think that's an argument that's passed like decades ago, and we've moved on, and if we're meant to accept bodies of all shapes and sizes and be body positive, then at the same time got to be body positive in this respect, don't we? There's plenty of BOPO type research out there. There's plenty of fitness inspiration, and so, well, you've got to take all the ends of the spectrum if you don't want people to be obese and overweight.
Yep.
And apparently that's a problem, and exercise adherence is an issue. Well, then, unfortunately, this is part of what comes through pressing health and well-being. Some people just take it to certain levels. I mean, recreational use is increased, and that's fine, as long as it doesn't translate to undesirable social aspects, then there shouldn't be a problem. And that's, again, something that can easily be pushed through peer networks that are supported at an education or research academic institution level, with not-for-profit organisations like Quinn, like a university, being engaged in that, and the relevant, I guess, industry stakeholders, which is the consumers and the coaches and the whoever. I mean, that's one way to say, hey, just don't do any of this stuff. And if you see anybody doing this stuff, call them out and stop it. And then we, you know, as a community, won't have these sorts of things popping up. Because suddenly, you know, if old mate Joe or something starts running around with a machete, and you know he's been on trend for about 20 weeks, that's not a good look for him, for the community, for anyone. But having that support network there would probably have stopped old mate from doing that. Somebody would have said, no, you got to, like,
tone it down.
Enough.
And like you said, usually extends from other problems in their lifestyle as well. And then, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, the steroids get the bad rap and then get demonized more by the media, which then makes it harder for what you need to do, or what any of us do with the use of it. Is that if it's in their system, no matter what they did, that was the problem. And I've seen that heaps.
So with any drug, though, that was and, you know, like, let's not be silly and say, it didn't contribute. Like, I'm sure there was a contribution in that trajectory, like, you know, at some level, but let's not, like, all the blame doesn't sit in there. Like,
well, nobody, in the same way, I think people have accepted now that nobody just takes, let's go with methamphetamine. Nobody just takes methamphetamine because they're a completely healthy, balanced individual. There are numerous other factors there that lead to that behavior, and they don't go away when they take the drug. So you can't say that the drug's the only reason they're doing anything else, right? And it's the same. Like, we're talking about this. We're talking about PEDs like it is a mental health issue, and it is an addictive drug, which is, well, in my experience, really rare. Like, that's the other thing. It's very rare that it's spoken about in those terms, mainly because it isn't really spoken about, I guess. But I don't think anybody completely mentally healthy with everything in check, I don't think anybody like that would be as likely to take them in the first place, right? So there's always going to be other things going on. I mean, would you agree? I mean, I also don't want to make the mistake of saying everybody who takes PEDs is mental, because that's not true. That's not true. Like,
no, but let's look at that. So instead of putting on this perfect like perfectionism construct and say, everything's in check and I don't take drugs and things are great. Our society as a whole has moved in a direction where we've got initiatives around mental health. And so it's okay not to be okay and all that stuff, right? And by extent, then we accept that people are going to do these things, but that doesn't take away from who they are, and that doesn't mean that they're not healthy, and that doesn't mean that they, this is a snapshot of their life, and whether they do it for 5 or 10 years, that's still 5 or 10% of their 100-year long life. I guess the concern might be like, I suppose substance use in terms of research again has links with antisocial behaviors, or has links with victimization, like bullying, things like that, particularly for peds, has links with depression, self-esteem issues pre-existing and then being exacerbated or things like that. So I mean, and then there's plenty of those outliers where somebody just tries it and then falls into a pattern of addiction, and suddenly there's stigma, ostracization and things like that. But really, like, just because life's like, it's under the table and over the table, isn't it? And suddenly when somebody's sitting here, like, it's okay if you've got a business suit on and you're, at a bar on Fridays going through bags, but suddenly, you're shooting oil into your leg or into your butt, and that's not okay. Or just because that's considered, you've got everything in line and we just don't talk about this. Well, suddenly started talking about mental health, and substances are a component and a contributor to that. So I guess everything should be on the table then, and everything should be a point of discussion from the point of public health again, and not from that's naughty, like you jail.
Yeah, I mean, the classic example when you talk about any drug is that, I mean, overwhelmingly the most harmful one's probably alcohol, right? The legalized one. I mean, more happens as a result of that than any of the others. I mean, I'm paraphrasing there, but I believe that to be true. And yeah, the only difference is one is socially accepted. I mean, one's even woven into our social fabric. Like, every time you have a celebration, we go and get wrecked. Like, people go and get wrecked, right? And that's like a common thing to do. But somebody taking a kind of balanced dose of PEDs and doing it in a semi-balanced way is frowned upon more. And it's the same. I mean, it used to be the same with marijuana. It's not now. That's almost like everyone's doing it and that's okay, even though it's not technically legal. But yeah, that 100% the ostracizing. And I also think from what I've seen anyway, it's almost seen as like a bit of a joke to the public, whereas like if you say methamphetamine or heroin, people think that's like a very serious thing. But steroids are viewed as almost like comical. You see somebody taking steroids, or you hear about someone taking steroids, and the general person will, make jokes, right? It's not viewed in the same light whatsoever.
Oh, he's an addict. So what's he addicted to? Steroids. Ha!
you know, like the
Yeah.
whole roid rages and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's not viewed in the same way at all. And like I've said it a few times already, this is the first time I've had a conversation with somebody about PEDs from a perspective of public health before, and addiction and that side of it, because the conversations elsewhere are either, especially online, social media, because that's the other aspect to this. There are a lot of people online who are making money from their, let's say, their physiques or their performance, and they are juiced, but they don't tell anybody they're juiced. And what happens is that when people feel the need to get to that level, or they're obviously there's lots of behaviours associated with people viewing people like that, it does lead to poor use of these things. Like, and there's a lot of people. I mean, I can't be sure, but I believe there's a lot of fitness influencers and stuff like that. I know a lot. Obviously, it's an open secret in powerlifting that the strongest guys, the majority, are taking something.
No.
Is that not true?
I
I don't want you to actually say everyone's on gear or nobody's on gear.
it just puts
It's
like
untested, and there's tested and there's untested.
Of course.
And
But you presume that everyone untested is just blasting gear, right?
no, not always. Oh, sorry, Gus.
No, but that's what the common conception is.
No, there's plenty of people who don't. And I know many people who at the top who have also won some of the biggest competitions in the world who don't. It, like I said, it's just, steroids is just one variable in the, you know, what you need to do, and it does certainly help. But it, you know, more people at the top are probably taking, because they're doing more things to help them get to the top. But what makes that person a winner is them, not their use at all. There's plenty of people using, and there's a lot of people who are doing really well who are not using as well. The higher and higher you get to the top, there's probably more of them taking it, but doesn't mean they all are. In the one variable that you can never beat is someone with the most gifted genetics that they're on this planet, and
Short levers.
yeah, there are just people there who are just crazy strong. Like I just got a 16-year-old new client who wants to take up powerlifting. He's 16 years old. We've been training for 1 year, and he trains in his garage with no help whatsoever. He did squat, bench, deadlift every single day, all 3 lifts. Like, no idea how to train. And he's got 100. He did 190 kilo squat for six reps, and he's 16 years old. You're not going to beat with him with good coaching and training. No one's going to beat him.
Yeah, well, I haven't fucking come close.
He's going to be insane. So no amount of drugs is ever going to catch that type of person. So again, it's just a variable that is in consideration for it, and it is not what makes the people at the top. If there was, if you could remove that, it will make a difference, but it doesn't. It's not what creates the people at the top at all, in any way, shape, or form.
So I suppose that's a really important message we need to get out there then, because I don't know. For people who are motivated by performance, are most of them going into it with the misconception that this magical compound will be a cheat code for me to be all the way at the top in half the time? Or
no, it's heaps of things involved. It's just like I said, it's one variable. If you don't consider any of the other variables, the person won't make any progress. The person who's made it to the top is their attitude, their discipline, their consistency. However, it does enhance it. And usually those people are pretty driven pretty hard at that type of attitude. Usually the people who do want to take something anyway. And usually they might be a bit more intelligent about it. But
Well, here's the other issue. Actually, there's going back to the financial thing. Girls will get a BBL and then pretend that they did it from their booty band workouts and then sell those.
right,
So what's the difference between a guy bashing a few oils and then saying, "Oh, I did this"? Financial motivations. That's an added issue to all of this, and I think it's real great that you pointed that out. But then, I mean, tested and untested comps are there for a reason within strength sports. But then, what about the whole element of cheating? Like, you say cheat code, but let's like cheat code in terms of like, I want to get to the top of the mountain faster, but cheating is different. I mean, we've got rules about not having aluminium cricket bat handle, or we've got widths for certain things. We've got, that use of these compounds shouldn't be detected in your body for sport. That's like
This
that comes back to something else.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, now, it was some of the recent news is that now because now they're testing people who just had high levels of testosterone, who weren't taking and had been banned from competing, even though it's their own natural capabilities. So they're just creating trying to create a level playing field by just looking at what hormonal profile, what substances are in your blood, so that those are the same. It's not just natural athletes competing against natural athletes anymore. It's whatever they deem as standard.
It's an interesting point about that. Is it cheating, or is it because I guess you could extend the same logic to knee wraps.
They give you another 20 kegs, don't they?
Yeah. They give you.
You can get really good at. You can get really good at using them and get like good 40-50 kilos out of them.
Right. So probably by the same factor of improvement, right? So is it cheating, or is it a marginal improvement?
Different pathways of improvements.
Right. So I guess cheating would be somebody else lifting the bar for you, I guess. But
yeah, well, you still put in the eating, you still put in the diet, you still put in the compound selection, you still got under there, you still,
that's the thing that people miss.
up. Nobody did that for you. But if suddenly it was somebody, saying, I didn't use anything else with somebody that did, then that's where it's not fair or something like that comes in.
These are two different conversations.
Yeah, completely.
And also with our conversation talking about the use for athletes and the public health perspective you're trying to take with most of the general population, there's completely different motivations, and they are driven by many different things, and athletes at a very high level are normally very educated in their choices, even in tested federations, because people are getting busted all the time. It doesn't mean they didn't know what they were doing. Of course they knew what they were doing. Actually, one example I can't remember which it might be 2014 Olympics. There was one thing one of them was that depending on how they test, is that they look at the epitestosterone to testosterone ratio in your urine tests, and there was research that showed that white tea extract helped lower the epitestosterone to testosterone ratio. And then suddenly that started popping up in everyone's blood tests to try and keep those ratios down. And then there was, a bunch of new records broken. They also had changed the standard of the ratio between the two. So you might have, in a lot of tested sports, they might have about a 6-to-1 ratio. So if the ratio is that high, you can actually still get away with about 0.5 ml to 1 ml of testosterone with a 6-to-1 ratio, depending on the individual. And so there's that joke that goes around that's like natural is just under 1 gram. But in the Olympics, it's a 2-to-1, from my understanding. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. It's very strict. And you can even naturally just be higher than that if your testosterone levels are naturally high. However, there was one where they changed it to a 4-to-1 ratio, and there were more world records broken in that competition, in that Olympics than since the banning of anabolic steroids.
Because everyone
first
just
place.
wound up.
Everyone
It's like-
knew what they are. So they're educated. They know how they're going to be tested, and those stats alone, that there were more records broken than that in that one Olympics compared to any other one, shows that they knew they know the standards. They're well educated. When they get caught, yeah, they play dumb. And a lot of them, a practice that some of these people do is they'll take other drugs to then not mask their drugs, but to get caught on something else, rather than getting caught on the thing that's going to give them a longer ban. So they'll take like a pre-workout. The pre-workout substance will come out. They'll get banned for that and serve a less harsh time.
Oh, so that they'll get pinged for pseudoephedrine.
Even though they had anabolic steroids in their system, it doesn't always work because then they'll just see both. But yeah, like I said, these are two different types of population of people we're
they're the
discussing
1%ers. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I think that's important with the public health perspective, I think it's a good parallel to draw, is, doctors were smoking, promoting cigarettes in, 50s?
Yeah.
They smoked Camels or whatever the ad was.
Yeah.
And for that period of time, everybody did that, and suddenly now we've got issues with lungs, and we've got issues with quitting, and all these. Then money's getting thrown at social initiatives for quitting and things like that. In the same way, I think on the flip side of what we're talking about, other bodies and entities and perhaps initiatives are just sort of considering, well, these choices that people are making around their compound use and et cetera, maybe that's not the choice that they want to make for the rest of their lives, but it's going to have long-term consequences for them. So we need to protect them from themselves.
Right.
And I'm just playing devil's advocate and perhaps trying to give both sides of the story here, and that perhaps, these choices, particularly if it's made by younger people, might not be the choice that they actually want to make.
Yeah.
And therefore, that's why there's that protective initiative, and that's why the criminality and the legal element fits and the public health sort of element fits in. It's like, you don't really want to do this because whatever. Now, I think that's also pretty patronizing to the person, isn't it? And that's not really going to stop them. Sometimes persistence creates resistance creates persistence, and so that might actually be the driving factor in what makes them want to use more, use harder. Some people don't like being told no. So
Yeah.
I mean, really, it just needs to be considered a bit more broadly, doesn't it?
Definitely. Yeah.
But yeah, I thought I'd just at least put that out there, that's probably one of the reasons.
Yeah.
I guess it's a bit of an art form to doing that as well. It's just having those social skills and experience behind use and people having used. So I guess those are the type of people you want in your peer system, because I don't say they can't. I just teach them how and give them an explanation and not letting it come off the table, and just showing them alternatives and better alternatives, or better way to use, and how they should come off. And if it leads to them not taking it, then yeah, so be it. And usually in a lot of the cases when it is brought up with me, it's definitely is usually not a sufficient. I can't say there is a sufficient reason, but it's like here's a solution. Here's another solution to solving that problem, and then I can also see where problems can occur if they do take it. Especially if it's driven. The body image one is the big one. If it is driven a lot by body image, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to fix that problem of that body image problem. Especially when we're talking about women, I've seen probably more often than not cause more body image problems in different aspects, where they'll either want to chase more, or the fact that they weren't ready for what it's going to do to their body. in some cases where that they want to take it because they want to look leaner and look more toned or whatever it is, end up building a heap of muscle. And it's like, I wasn't here to try and gain weight or build muscle. They might, so they got a result of the not understanding the intention behind what it was going to do to them, and then see women worse off mentally from it. So, but me, I only know that from experience and reading and probably more so experience, because there isn't that, again, huge amounts of information. I've always been about just harm reduction and optimizing performance. So those are the two kind of areas I would look at. But they go both hand in hand perfectly well, because what enhances performance also enhances, looks after people's health is also what usually enhances performance. Like I was saying, like less is more, and usually less is not so harmful.
Because you're taking that sustainability long-term sort of approach. Really,
Yeah.
like.
Oh yeah,
That's
someone.
good.
Yeah, for sure.